do that. Okay. All right. So I appreciate everybody coming on, and for our East Point Movie Critic Discussion Night with One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. So welcome, everybody. And I have to ask, of the people who are here, and I want to give credit to Fred on this, those who voted for Cuckoo's Nest, anyone want to tell me why you chose that one? Because I'm curious, because we had a lot of very diverse votes for this one. So
It's our
Elizabeth
favorite
or
movie.
Craig, either one? Go ahead.
He's right there.
I don't think he did.
Elizabeth, you want to answer?
I never saw it, and it won a lot of awards. It's one of the few that won 5. There's like
Right.
only 3 that won 5 awards.
Right, and it was the first one after it happened one night in the 30s that won all 5 for Best Picture, Best Director, Best Screenplay, Actor, and Actress. And there's only one since, which was Silence of the Lambs, that did it, and that was 16 years after this. So those were the only 3 in going back before the 40s. And Craig, you had a thought too.
And it's one of the, I was forced to read the book in high school by a student teacher. So it's one of the few movies that I read the book before I saw the movie. So I just really enjoyed it. It was one of those, just you thought in your head as you were reading it what it's going to look like on film. Just enjoyed it.
So, and I'll get to this too, but I'd like you to comment on, because since you did read the book, I only read like literally the Cliff Notes to the book online. I read the Cliff Notes. So I didn't read the book, but I'd like, when we get to that part, I'd like you to chime in on the discussion of the differences between the book and the movie, because I think those are significant in as far as the approach goes.
Well, consider.
But I don't want to forget to say this. If everybody could put their email address in the chat, because that way I know who to send the vote for the next round to.
In the chat room, see.
So if you find the chat on the bottom, or depending on your monitor, it may be the 3 little dots in the corner, in the corner right, it could be there. Or it could just be on the bottom of your screen. It depends on what device you're using and how it's set up. But please, everyone, just put that in.
What about the ones you have? Should we redo it or something?
What do you mean the ones you have?
Well, you already have a lot of the emails, don't you?
Oh, no, I already have, but I need to know who's in this this
okay.
program, because that's the only one. Those are the only people who get the vote for next time.
Oh, okay.
Whoever's watching this gets to vote for the next one.
I have to figure out how to do that one.
Yeah, how do you do it?
Yeah, in the chat, you can just put your, a few are already going in. On the bottom of your screen, there should be a button for the chat, and you just, that enables it. And on the side of the screen, there's like a new window, and you can just enter your information, usually at the bottom.
Put that with it.
I see. It's mine's on the top. Okay.
If anyone can't find it, send me an email directly, and I'll make sure to include you. But if possible, do it in the chat. Then I would have them all in one place. Okay, so Craig, you read the book. Anyone else here who voted specifically for this movie who wants to chime in as to why they chose it? I know there were some people. Oh yeah, Debbie, go ahead. You got to unmute yourself.
I just did. I was sort of disturbed by it when I saw it way back in like the 70s, whenever it came out originally. And I was really curious about, number one, did things change? I know that the electric shock treatment is different today than it was. I really was curious to see what it would look like in, this century as opposed to last century. And how much, did we make any progress or not?
I'm glad you asked, and I will address that towards the end. I actually have some notes on that. Okay, great. Anyone else have any thoughts they want to say about the choice of the movie?
Press a key to get on or something?
One thing.
Yes, Marcia.
Yeah, was this his first movie that kind of typecast him as a crazy character? Because he's had that
Jack Nicholson?
reputation, and I'm wondering if this is the one that springboarded that his
Good
crazy.
question. I will get to that in a little bit when I start talking about the key
Okay.
actors. There's three people I'm going to focus on primarily. Milos Forman, the director, Jack Nicholson, and Louise Fletcher, as far as the role this movie played in their career. So I will cover that shortly, actually. Okay. All right. Great. So a question is, do you see McMurphy as a Christ-like figure? Keep in mind, he slept with a prostitute. He gave her to Billy. Another kind of interesting, and of course, he sacrificed himself for the other patients. Now, something else to consider, and anyone want to chime in on that first before I go on to anything else?
Yeah.
What's the question?
Do you feel McMurphy was a Christ-like figure?
Christ-like figure?
Yes. Fred? You got on
He
mute?
had
There you go.
I think he had a sociopathic personality disorder. He was a liar. He was a grandiose, and he was just, a sociopath. So I wouldn't call him a Christ-like figure. He's a sociopath. It was classic.
Well, interestingly though, because he was
Not
faking it
crazy.
to get it admitted. So he wasn't actually originally
Was not
going to be
crazy.
admitted, and they actually did cover that in the movie. So it did seem like, yes, he did have definite sociopathic tendencies. So I can understand that point. But by the same token, that wasn't why he went to the hospital. He went to avoid jail. So it was kind of interesting.
So maybe Fred, could you define sociopath? Because this is a man with credible feeling. Remember, when Billy suicided, he had an opportunity to leave the premises, but he couldn't leave. He wanted to be there and be helpful to Billy. So I would say he's far from a sociopath. He was really, kind of a man's man in many ways, but he was just flamboyant. He was a leader. He was an interesting character. He thought he could play the system and kind of game the system by going to the mental institute. But, that wasn't so successful, but.
Right.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. I saw him as a symbol of independence and freedom, because back 45 years ago when I first saw the movie, I tied his character, and Louise Fletcher also,
No.
what was happening to Milos Forman, the director.
I'll cover that too. Yep.
And Milos Forman, I thought, presented him as a symbol of independence. And Louise Fletcher, if I can talk about her a bit, as a symbol of power and authority that he escaped Czechoslovakia from. He didn't want the totalitarianism of the Russians. And so I think that was Louise Fletcher in his mind. So I just saw Jack Nicholson combating with the power and authority of Louise Fletcher.
Right. A very good point. She was, one of the critics described her as, quote, repressive authoritarian, which I think is perfectly accurate and very succinct. All right, to get to a couple of things I meant to cover. Just this film is ranked number 33 on the American Film Institute's top 100 films of all time. Now the list is a little old. It came out in 2007, but number 33, that's pretty high up there. The budget for it was $4.4 million, and the box office gross was $163.3 million. The only movie that beat it when it came out in 1975 was Jaws. Okay, so now another question I have is, did Nurse Ratched really want to do good? She said she wanted to keep McMurphy because she said she thought, quote, we can help him. But was that her real reason, or did she really want to destroy him, which is what ended up happening?
Yeah.
Anyone have
Well, the
thoughts on
evil
that?
was a
Marcia?
complete symbol of
Go ahead. Marcia?
No, I didn't say anything.
Oh,
I'm
sorry.
gonna
Okay.
Mute myself.
I think she
Okay.
wanted to emasculate him. She wanted to emasculate him. She just, she really hated, I think part of her hated men in that way, working in
That's
that
what I
environment.
Mhm.
Certainly
And
hated.
also, I think by her being able to keep him repressed was her way of reinforcing her authority with everybody else
Right.
in the ward. Interesting note, Louise Fletcher, in her own notes, which she revealed many years later, viewed Ratchet as a virgin. That was never in the script. It was never any instruction was given. She just envisioned it for her part, that she thought that was important to for getting in character.
Was she heterosexual?
She didn't explain that in the information I read. She just said that, because she didn't reveal a lot, but she did say she felt she was a virgin, which is an interesting question you asked, though. And then, of course, she knew Billy had tried to commit suicide more than once, and yet, in front of everyone else, she shames him by threatening to tell his mother about sleeping with the prostitute. So that's what prompted him to kill himself. And of course, then McMurphy attempts to strangle her. And of course, that scene also had sexual overtones in the way it was filmed, almost like a rape, actually. All right, so a couple of things I want to get to as far as the director. So Milos Forman was nominated for 3 Oscars. He won 2. This was his first for One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. Second was Amadeus in 1984. Which was made in 84. And then the third one was made in 1996, The People versus Larry Flint, which is kind of interesting because Larry Flint just recently died. Yeah. For Golden Globes, he was nominated for 4 and won 3. The one, other than the 3 I've just mentioned, he won for all those 3. The fourth one he was nominated for, but didn't win, was for Ragtime in 1981. An interesting note about, if I can find it here, in a second. Okay. His childhood, as was alluded to earlier, was marked by the early loss of his parents. His mother died in 1943 in Auschwitz, and his father in another concentration camp, Mittelbau-Dora, in 1944. He was an eyewitness to his mother's arrest by the Gestapo. He was raised by relatives and friends of his parents, and after he attended grammar school, he went to a boarding school, and then after the war, one of his classmates was Václav Havel, which I thought was kind of interesting. So his he also wanted to direct Hair. After the success of One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, he got to do that in 1979. So I thought that was kind of interesting. And of course, Amadeus and People versus Larry Flint with Woody Harrelson. He also did The Man on the Moon, which was a portrayal of Andy Kaufman, the comic. Similar, there's some similar themes to the rebellious nature, but also with some comedic overtones. And Jim Carrey played that part in The Man on the Moon, which was made in '99.
It's too
Now, as for Nicholson, oh wait, and I should. Where was the story about how he got hired for this? I wanted to cover that. I don't know if I could find it again now. Because it was kind of interesting, the story, how this movie got made in the first place. All right. Well, I'll do Jack Nicholson and I'll get to it in a bit. So as far as how this movie affected Jack Nicholson's career and vice versa. So I said it had a budget of $4.4 million. Interestingly enough, he, one second, I'm going to mute everybody just to be on the safe side. And
Ed, you're muted. Ed, you're
thank
muted.
you. I muted myself too. I didn't realize I would do that. Thank you. So Nicholson wanted to option the movie years before it ever got made. And then when he went to get the rights, he found they were already taken by Kirk Douglas. And then the way, well, I'll get to more on Kirk Douglas in a minute, and his son, Michael Douglas, who was one of the producers of the movie. But Nicholson was born in New Jersey, the son of a showgirl. His mother was mixed descent, and she married an Italian-American showman in 1936, before she realized he was already married. Let's see. Her manager may have been Nicholson's biological father rather than the person he thought was his father. And the interesting part is in 1974, Time magazine researchers learned and informed Nicholson that his sister, quote, June, was actually his mother. And his other sister, quote, Lorraine, was really his aunt. By this time, both his mother and grandmother had died. And on finding out, Nicholson said it was, quote, a pretty dramatic event, but it wasn't what I'd call traumatizing. I was pretty well psychologically formed already. So I thought that was kind of interesting. And when you think of the mother, sister, and the confusion there, it reminded me of Chinatown.
Chinatown, yes.
Right?
Yeah.
So I thought that was kind of interesting too. Anyway, his career wasn't going very well. He had a screenplay that he wrote in 1967 called The Trip, which was directed by Roger Corman and starred Peter Fonda and Dennis Hopper. After first reading the script, Fonda told Nicholson he was totally impressed by the writing and felt it could become a great film. However, Fonda was disappointed with how that film turned out, said it became predictable, and he was livid. Nicholson also co-wrote with Bob Rafelson Head, which starred the Monkees, and he arranged the movie's soundtrack. Never knew any of that. Nicholson's first big acting break came, of course, in Easy Rider in 1969. He played an alcoholic lawyer. He received his first Oscar nomination.
Much prettier.
And that started his anti-hero tendencies, but it was a big lucky break for him. The role had originally been written for the actor Rip Torn, who withdrew from the project after an argument with Dennis Hopper. Now, Nicholson, well, again, that's another story. I won't even bother with that. Now, sometimes Nicholson ad-libs, and if you saw 5 Easy Pieces with Karen Black in 1970, really famous scene in a diner where he's trying to get a sandwich a certain way, but they don't want to serve it that way. Do you remember that?
Yeah.
He didn't ad-lib the whole thing, but he did ad-lib a good part of it. But his most celebrated roles are Easy Rider, 5 Easy Pieces, Cuckoo's Nest, Carnal Knowledge, The Last Detail, Terms of Endearment, Prizzi's Honor, and The Shining, of course, and A Few Good Men, I would say, maybe The Departed. So he's had 12 Academy Award nominations, which make him the most nominated male actor in the Academy's history. He won it twice for Cuckoo's Nest and As Good as It Gets. And he won a supporting actor for Terms of Endearment. He's one of only 3 male actors to win 3 Academy Awards, and one of only, well, that's not as important. He also won 6 Golden Globes and received the Kennedy Center honor in 2001. Now, Louise Fletcher, she was suggested for this role by Jack Nicholson. Now, it wasn't his first choice, and she was about the 6th or 7th choice overall. But the first choice Nicholson had was Anne Bancroft. I didn't find out why she didn't get it or why they didn't choose her, but Nicholson came up with the suggestion after he saw the 1974 movie Thieves Like Us that Robert Altman directed. Okay, I'm gonna mute everybody again. Okay. All right, because so I was hearing some background noise. So now Louise Fletcher had been on an acting hiatus, and she came back to make Thieves Like Us with Robert Altman after having children. And then after that, that's what got her this movie. Now, I really never heard much about her afterwards. Of course, she did win the Oscar for it, but she also won the BAFTA, which is the British version of the Oscars, and a Golden Globe for Best Actress. Only the 3rd actress ever to win all 3 for a single performance, the other 2 being Audrey Hepburn and Liza Minnelli. But so I didn't really hear much of anything about her acting after that, but I looked it up on IMDb, the Internet Movie Database, if you don't know. And she had over 100 roles in other movies after this, including The Exorcist 2, Brainstorm, Firestarter, Flowers in the Attic, and Cruel Intentions. Most notably, she had a recurring role in the TV series Star Trek Deep Space Nine for about 7 years. So, and she did get Primetime Emmy nominations for guest starring roles on Picket Fences and Joan of Arcadia. Now, as far as the other actors, you may have noticed Danny DeVito as one of the patients, and Christopher Lloyd, now Danny DeVito, it was not his first movie. He had very small bit parts for the previous 5 years before this movie. but it was Christopher Lloyd's very first role. And my interesting Christopher Lloyd story is I met Christopher Lloyd about a year before this movie came out, because my girlfriend at the time lived near Yale University, her family, and I was a young teenager and middle-aged teenager, whatever. And her parents had an apartment over their garage. They rented it out sometimes to people, and one of them happened to be a Yale Drama School student named Chris, who I met one time in their family's kitchen. And he didn't look like Tabor in this movie. He looked more like Jim Ignatowski in Taxi, who we will end up doing several years later. But he spoke like Jim Ignatowski, and he seemed so much like Jim Ignatowski that I didn't recognize him in One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, also because his head was shaved. But my girlfriend did. We're watching the movie in an audience, I don't know when it was, whatever that year, late that year. And she goes, "Oh my God, that's Chris." And I'm like, "Who?" And she said, "Do you remember the tenant we had?" And I'm like, "Oh my God, you're right. I didn't recognize him because he had his hair cut short." I said, "Well, didn't you know about this?" She goes, "He told us one time he was leaving. He wasn't going to stay there anymore because he was going to Oregon to make a picture with Jack Nicholson." We were like, "Sure, Chris, sure." There he is. And that launched his career. And then, of course, for 8 years, he was in Taxi. He came in at the end of the first season and stayed with it for the next 8 years. And then Back to the Future in 1985 was what really launched him. But interestingly, in 78 and 79, he was cast as a guest star on Barney Miller, 2 different episodes, one in 78, one in 79, playing 2 totally different characters. They just liked him and brought him back. And then that may have helped him get the Taxi role, because that was also the end of 78. So I thought that was kind of interesting too. Now I wanted to discuss the differences between the book and the movie. Craig, you want to chime in a little on that? Got to unmute yourself.
You don't have to.
Well, as somebody said, that was 45 years ago.
Yep.
So my remembering the book is long gone. So I really can't speak to that.
Okay, all right. I did, like I said, I went through literally the Cliff Notes online. The most notable difference between the film and the novel is the story's point of view. In the novel, do you remember who the narrator was?
The Indian.
Yes, exactly, the chief. And he reveals the story of the Battle of Wills between Nurse Ratched and R.P. McMurphy. Oh, that's what I wanted to mention. R.P. McMurphy, his initials, RPM, revolutions per minute. So that's a real play on words, because he was, of course, the revolutionary who tried to lead the rebellion, but also RPM as in spinning, record spinning. And he was being played like a record is played by the system. So I thought that was kind of interesting in the way they did that with his name. And then, of course, Ratched's name, so many meanings. Wretched, Ratched, like she, ratchets up the tension. There's a few things going on there. As far as the cast, the different people in the cast, when Nicholson got to the set, he was shocked at, as he put it, all these crazies that they brought for the movie. And he wasn't sure who the patients were, because they did film it in a real asylum in Oregon. And in fact, the director of the asylum was not an actor. He was the director of the asylum. So that was kind of interesting. They also had some of the patients, inmates, kind of both actually, and depending on individual circumstances. And several of those, not with the real speaking parts, were in the background, and they were actual patients. Now, the reason they were able to cast with such incredible accuracy or dramatic portrayal, very effective at least, was because they had a really long casting period of 6 months, because they had to wait for Jack Nicholson to be available to make the movie. Oh, wait a minute. Sorry, someone is waiting to come in. Okay. All right. So yeah, 6 months to cast the movie so they could find, whoever they wanted, but they saw over 1,000 people to cast the different patients that you saw. And Nicholson was familiar with a couple of them. The guy who played Cheswick and I think Harding, the two he actually knew from other roles. And but he said he got a little intimidated at first when we saw Vincent Schiavelli, who had the very long face and was famous as in Fast Times at Ridgemont High for being the teacher who, I'm sorry, not Fast Times at Ridgemont High, Ferris Bueller's Day Off, the teacher going Bueller, no, that was Ben Stein. Now, he was in Fast Times at Ridgemont High playing a teacher, science teacher, doing, I think, dissecting a pig. So, but he was a famous character actor because he has such an unusual face.
Is his name Renee?
So that's when you have a long casting period, you can do that. Now, the book hones in on the concept of optics with the mental work. The book focused more on the mental institution representing government. The movie really didn't do that. And for the reason of not portraying the narrator, not portraying any narrator, which Ken Kesey, who wrote the book, wanted, as well as not focusing on the government as being the real culprit, but more on the mental hospital system, which is what the movie's focus was. Ken Kesey swore he never would see the movie. Although one of the actors said that he was very happy to cash the checks, but he never saw the movie.
Wow.
Let's see. Right. He, yeah, that was the reason, right? He never intended to see it, although supposedly he may have seen part of it when he was surfing on cable one night until he realized what it was, and then he changed stations. Okay, I wanted to cover that. So there was another thing, that there was much more racism in the book. The characters of what are called in the book the Black Boys, which if you saw, most of the orderlies were African-Americans, including Scatman Crothers, who Nicholson worked with, I think, 4 times, including The Shining. But anyway, this was the first time. They were tools of Nurse Ratched. And there was a lot more racism based on what I read in the book, but the movie kind of underplayed that because that wasn't the primary focus of the movie. So they went a different direction with it. Okay, so I covered that. All right, so as far as reviews, I told you about how popular it was with American Film Institute. Oh, right, I have this I wanted to get to. There was a quote, if I can find it. Oh, shoot, okay. I'm not going to be able to do that. All right, I didn't realize I couldn't do that. So Vincent Canby in the New York Times was not a fan of the movie. Oh, he admitted that there were several good moments to it, but he thought it, to make it a metaphor for America, as he put it, was oversimplifying it. Saying a hospital ward shouldn't be a metaphor for America. Richard Schickel in Time magazine called it an earnest attempt to make a serious film, but it backs away from the human reality and the cloudy but potent symbolism Ken Kesey found in The Asylum.
God, tell me where you met this lovely lady, Amy Rubin, that's there.
Their dissenting opinions. Now, the producer, many of the critics actually called it a masterpiece and the best film of the year. I mean, that was most of the critics. I was trying to read you a few dissenters. So the way the movie got made, and that's what I wanted to cover, if I can find it here. There's a funny story. Okay. US Customs almost doomed the movie from ever getting made. So Kirk Douglas, when he got the rights, had a stage adaptation made, and he thought, well, it'll be great in Los Angeles. We'll do it there. When the critics love it, we'll get it made into a movie. Didn't happen. The reviews of the play were not so good. And anyway, Kirk Douglas contacted Milos Forman about the project, promising to send him a copy of the book for his perusal, which Forman at the time Czechoslovakia, now the Czech Republic, had not been familiar with it. So he mailed him the novel, but given the government at the time Czechoslovakia, they confiscated it at customs and it never reached the director, which caused the director to think Kirk Douglas is full of crap. He never sent it to me, and caused Kirk Douglas to think, what's with this guy? I sent him the book. He never got back to me. So years later, this wasn't found out until years later, Michael Douglas, who was, he didn't say it, but he was, when I saw an interview with him on YouTube, he kind of felt like he was stuck in his career. He had The Streets of San Francisco, but it wasn't what he wanted to do, a TV series in the mid 60s to early 70s. But he said, Dad, you're giving up on this film because they don't want to cast you in it, but let me try to produce it. So he contacted Milos Forman one more time. And then they said, what do you mean you didn't get the script or the book? Of course we sent it to you. And he's like, oh, then they figured out it was confiscated. So that changed everything. Then when they tried to get it made, one of the studios wanted to change the ending. The producers, oh, and I should mention the other producer he got was named Saul Zaentz. I hope I pronounced that last name right, Zaentz. This was his first foray into producing it because Michael Douglas couldn't get any of the big studios to want to do it. Too depressing. You've got a character committing suicide. The lead character gets murdered. It's about a mental institution. Who's going to want to see that? Okay. So anyway, Michael Douglas had someone he knew who was a music producer, and apparently a famous one, because Creedence Clearwater Revival, this guy produced them. That's a whole other side story, because John Fogerty can't stand this guy and practically wanted to spit on his grave because he thought he stole royalties from him. Totally other matter. But as far as this goes, Zaentz got the movie produced with Michael Douglas, who at the time was 28, one of the very youngest Hollywood producers. And Zaentz went on to also produce Amadeus, again with Milos Forman, and The English Patient in 1996. So he won 3 Oscars. He also did The Hobbit and Lord of the Rings. So he was very, very successful.
What do you think?
Now, some of the other interesting facts about the movie.
Ask me first.
I mentioned about the customs. And then wanting to change the ending, which, they wanted McMurphy to live at the end, which obviously was a problem. Now, so as far as Kirk Douglas was trying to first get it made, he wanted to play the role himself. But 10 years later, when it was finally going to happen, he was too old for the part, leaving Milos Forman to consider and contact Gene Hackman, Marlon Brando, and the one he really wanted, Burt Reynolds, before finally settling on Jack Nicholson. I can't see it with Burt Reynolds, I got to tell you. And then as far as Nurse Ratched, the other ones they were looking at were Anne Bancroft, Colleen Dewhurst, Geraldine Page, and Angela Lansbury. But seeing Jack Nicholson said, after seeing Louise Fletcher in the Robert Altman movie, she has exactly the right manners for it. Okay, and now Dr. Dean Brooks in the movie, I mentioned that was, he was the actual superintendent, and he played Dr. John Spivey, the one who assessed R.P. McMurphy's psychological health. And some of that was actually ad lib. Nicholson said the questions, the doctor was actually reading from the form. Nicholson's answers were mostly ad lib. And he said, yeah, I kind of overdid it, maybe because my daughter was on the set and I wanted to show off for her. So I ad libbed a bit on that. I thought that was kind of interesting. Also, the harbor master, if you saw it when they went to take the boat out, the harbor master who gives them a funny look, that was Mel Lambert. He was not an actor. He was a local area businessman who had a strong relationship with the local native community, which paid benefits because he's the one who introduced them to Will Sampson, who played the chief. Because they looked in the book, where are we going to find a very tall male Indian who can act? Well, this guy who ended up with playing the harbor master, who wasn't an actor, gave him to him. And apparently, from what Jack Nicholson said, he and Will Sampson really bonded on the set of the movie. They had a really good relationship. Now, the actors, the stars, lived on the hospital ward during most of the production. The men personalized their sleeping quarters. They spent days on the campus, quote, getting a sense of what it was like to be hospitalized and interacting with the real patients. Many of the scenes were shot without the actors' knowledge. Milos Forman wanted to complete what he called this realistic immersion. He led his performers in unscripted group therapy sessions in which he directed the actors to develop their characters' psychological maladies organically. He would often capture footage of them both in and out of character without explicitly mentioning that the cameras were rolling. The film's final cut includes a shot of a visibly irritated Fletcher reacting to a piece of direction fed to her by Milos Forman. Danny DeVito actually had some issues with this immersive technique, deep problem issues. He became emotionally strained by the demanding shooting schedule, and he was recently engaged to Rhea Perlman, and he was 3,000 miles from her and was very stressed out. He developed an imaginary friend with whom he would have nightly chats. and he was concerned his own sanity might be slipping away. So he sought the advice of Dr. Brooks, again, the guy who played the real head of the hospital, who assured them there was no reason to worry as long as he could still identify that the character he was talking to was fictional. Thought that was kind of interesting. But the cast, the crew was actually worried about the sanity of one cast member, Sidney Lassick, who played Cheswick. He exhibited increasingly unpredictable and emotionally erratic behavior during his time in character, and that culminated in a tearful outburst during his observation of the final scene between Nicholson and Will Sampson. And he became so overwhelmed during the scene that he had to be removed from the set. So he really got into character. The fishing trip scene barely made it into the movie. Initially, Milos Forman was opposed to including it. He didn't want to take the characters out of the grounds of the hospital because he felt the temporary liberation would undercut the dramatic force of the film's ending. In the end, the producer, Zanes, convinced him to shoot the fishing trip sequence. It was the final scene filmed. It was the only scene shot out of chronological sequence. In the fishing scene, there's a little cameo of Angelica Houston. She was dating Jack Nicholson during the production. She has a non-speaking role as one of the spectators on the dock as they're steering the boat to shore. Okay, and I think that covers it. I want to make sure I covered that.
It's ridiculous.
Okay. Okay, anyone else have any other comments? Anything I went over that you wanted to ask about or discuss? Yes, Debbie, you got to unmute yourself.
Yep. I just wanted to make a comment when you had asked before whether you thought that Nurse Ratched was really, trying to be helpful, or was she really not? And I really feel that she was not. She really only cared about her own power and control over the patients. After Billy had spent the night with the woman, when he started to talk to her, he didn't stutter. He felt like a man. He was doing great.
Right.
And she just squashed it all down, and he ended up killing himself. And I thought she was just a horror. He just wanted to control everything.
That was the one of the arguments that if Nicholson represents a Christ-like figure, she represents the Antichrist.
Right. Yep.
Let's see. There was something I wanted to pick up on that, if I could find it. I don't want to forget to mention this. Richard Smith mentioned, sent me information on Entertainment Weekly has a really good piece that you can find called Oscar Goes Cuckoo, which originally ran in 2001, but updated in 2018, about the behind the scenes history of it, of the making of the movie, which was kind of interesting. I'd recommend it.
What the ending?
Are you kidding me? You can talk. World, open mic.
Ed, this is Nancy.
Yes.
I just wanted to say, your research and those side stories and facts, oh my gosh, it's just so interesting. And you find such unique information. I mean, it's fabulous. I just loved hearing it. I loved hearing the side stories. And, I was back in grad school as studying psychology. I wish I had known all this when I saw that movie. But I missed the state. What state was it in? And how long did they stay at that hospital? The actors, how long were they there?
It was a few months. I didn't get the exact time, but I think it was a few months. But it was in Oregon. It was Oregon.
Okay,
yeah.
All right.
Yep.
But I just keep it coming. Your research is so appreciated.
Oh, thanks. Well, I'm lucky in that the movie you chose had such a rich history to it. Like last time, even though I hated the ending to African Queen, the history and the making of the movie was incredibly fascinating. So that kind of made it worthwhile. Okay, so
the
yes,
title?
go ahead, Elizabeth.
The title?
Go ahead, Elizabeth.
One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. It's a great title.
Oh, yes.
Are you going to talk about that?
Oh, I don't know. I mean, it was never, referenced overtly in the movie. It just seemed to make sense. Obviously, the one being R.P. McMurphy. And he comes in and lands and does his thing and stirs up trouble, but trying to have a rebellion. I thought, it was interesting. If you want to talk about it, it was interesting in the scene where he finds out that most of the people there are there by choice.
That was terrific.
Because he didn't know, he thought he was playing the system, but as we found out, the system was playing him because they made the determination on how long he could stay. He thought he had X number of days and he was out like it was a regular prison sentence. And he was just doing it here because it was easier than doing hard time in a jail. But that wasn't the case. Once he goes into the mental institution, it's up to them because he had no choice. But the other characters, they were there of their own free will and they could come and go theoretically anytime they wanted to. So I thought that was kind of a fascinating turn of events. And that was just the start of him falling into the trap and getting sucked into the system and full repression and ultimately leading to his lobotomy. Yes.
Can you talk about that a bit? The lobotomy, there's the ending. It seems like the system beats you down and eventually is going to get you. Is what they told us. He had no hope at that point.
Right. So so Ken Kesey obviously felt, again, he was looking at it as the government repressing individualism, but in the hospital, it was more of an indictment of the mental institution in the film. Now, granted, you can say, well, who runs it? It's a state-run mental institution, so it is the government behind it. But the overt part of the film really focused on the mental institution. And yes, it definitely wanted to maintain order over seeming to want to help the patients. And that's where I wanted to get, because there was an article in The Independent that ran in 2018 called "The Film That Changed Psychiatry Forever." That was this film. And it says, one of the more caring people, I'm just going to read you a couple of quick excerpts. One of the more caring people in the film was the psychiatrist, Dr. John Spivey, who in real life was Dr. Dean Brooks, director of the Oregon State Hospital where the film was set. Yeah, if you could mute yourself, Rebecca. Thanks. It said, even at the time that it was released, the practice of psychiatry, Rebecca, could you please mute yourself?
Oh, I wanted to say something though about the psychiatry.
Okay. Yes.
What about Snake Pit? Did anybody ever see Snake Pit?
Yes, and actually that was mentioned by someone who, Michael Douglas, when he was trying to get the movie made, and they're like, who wants to see a movie about, psychological depression and mental institutions? And he's like, and Michael Douglas in the video where I saw him talking YouTube, he goes, what about Snake Pit? That was a huge box office hit. And he goes, and I wish I knew that at the time when I was getting these rejections, because I could have said, hey, it was a big box office hit. It was set in a mental institution, but you're absolutely right.
And it was also, I think, a lot more, upsetting and depressing. And oh my God, to me, that was one of the most moving psychiatric compositions of a movie. I don't know.
It was harrowing. Yes, absolutely. Yeah. This actually was leavened with humor, which Vincent Canby didn't appreciate. In fact, it was supposed to be a serious movie, but it was funny. But I thought the way it succeeds in both levels was pretty remarkable. So, according to this article in The Independent by Patricia Casey, even at the time that this film was released, the practice of psychiatry and the state of its institutions was changing over to, to care. To care in the community. The practices depicted in the film were obsolete. But remember, the book it was made from was in the early 60s. The movie came out in the mid 70s. So the view that mental illness either did not exist, or if it did, it was due to oppression and other environmental causes, among them which were termed schizophrenic parents. Such illness required therapy, not pills or ECT, electroshock therapy. So the film may have hastened the end of institutional care, which was already going, but this really was maybe the final nail in its coffin. In general parlance, patients who are discharged following treatment in psychiatric units are described as being released, even though they have sought treatment on their own volition, just as with people with heart disease or arthritis. One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest has had an enduring impact, and some of that may be due to the personal story of Milos Forman himself, again with the Nazi concentration camp issues and Czechoslovakia repression. So he witnessed and experienced the repression, and thus has been spent his life and working on combating the repressive authority with a lot of his films. Amadeus, obviously, similar theme, and of course, The People versus Larry Flint. To a lesser extent, Ragtime, but that was still present in there as well. So I thought that was kind of interesting. Yes, Marcia. Just unmute.
Yes. If many of the patients were there voluntarily, couldn't they have opted out of treatment? For example, at the end, when they took the guy and he didn't want to go, he was holding on to Murphy and saying, I don't want to go. I mean, couldn't he have said, enough already? I'm out of here. I don't want it. If it's voluntary, they don't have any power to do these things to them, which I could not understand.
Okay,
They said they
so
could walk out at any time, but
Good-
meanwhile,
good
the doors
point.
were locked.
good
But then-
point in theory, but if they want to be in the hospital, admitted to the hospital, they have to abide by the hospital's rules. So if the hospital says that, then what he could have said, yep, he could have said, you know what, you're going to do this to me, I'm out of here, check me out.
At that point.
But he didn't. And part of the I think the film reason for that is because they wanted to show this was Ratchet's overwhelming power, and McMurphy was the only one who could kind of stir some rebelliousness up in them. That's my take on it, for what it's worth.
Okay, yeah. Okay, well.
And
yeah.
also
Anyone
they
else have
get
any thoughts?
institutionalized and people don't want to leave. It's just like long-term prisoners. They get out, they want to come back in because they can't live outside.
Right.
Mm.
Right, they can't adapt. But this way, everything's taken care of for him. And Harding sort of addressed that he felt things were taken care of. He didn't have to deal with the issues he had with his wife while he was in there. That was an issue,
Exactly,
which
right.
apparently in the book, when they went into more depth, I don't know if they showed her in the book, but she was her existence played a bigger role in the book than in the movie. But he mentioned it enough, so you got the sense that this was he had issues with his wife, and this was his way of being able to avoid it.
Right.
When Louise Fletcher accepted her Oscar that evening, I don't know if you knew this, Ed, but she thanked the committee and the audience, the viewers, in sign language. So her mother and father, who were deaf,
Right.
could understand what she was saying. And
Right.
it left me
I
with
think she was the
warm
first one to do that.
feeling
Right.
about this nasty woman.
Right. But wasn't she the first one to sign an acceptance? I think she was, if I remember right.
I think so, yeah.
Yeah, because I did read she did that. Yeah, it was very cool. Yeah, Mike, do you have your hand up or no?
Yeah.
Oh, Ann and Fred. Ann, go ahead.
Oh, well, first of all, this was really terrific, Ed, because I took it at very face value. I looked at the movie as, focusing in on the mental health system, but now it makes utter sense, the power that Nurse Ratched had, but so thank you for that. But just as an aside, there's a crazy series that, believe me, is not for everyone, but I kind of liked it. I think it's on Netflix. It's called Ratched.
Yes.
And it's this, do you see that it is kind of a little violent?
I saw the first 2 episodes and I was like, okay, I think I'm out of here. But
Okay.
yeah, Sarah
like-
Paulson is like a backstory of how Ratched became Ratched.
Exactly.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's pretty.
Little gruesome.
Yeah, I think lurid is the word I was thinking of. Yeah, not for everybody, right?
But I liked it.
Okay. Yeah. Any other comments? Hey, Ben, how are you?
Hey, Ben.
It's Ben.
It's Ben.
Hey,
Ben
Ben.
from New York.
Long
Where are you,
distance.
Ben? Where are you?
He's in a hotel.
Well,
Hey, Ben, you don't have any women there with you, do you?
he does. He's not going to tell you.
Ah,
That's why he came on late.
No, that's right.
And when he's muted.
He's muted.
Ben, you're
Oh, you're
muted.
muted, Ben. Yep.
Is Ratched there hiding behind that curtain?
Hopefully not.
I said I just heard the door knocked and it was Nurse Ratched.
Yeah. Uh-oh, you're in trouble.
Did anybody recognize, what's his name, the little guy?
Danny DeVito.
Did anybody recognize Danny
Danny
DeVito?
DeVito.
Did anybody recognize him there in the show? I didn't.
Martini. His name
You didn't
was
recognize him?
Martini.
And also Christopher
Other than
Lloyd.
short- Christopher Floyd, I recognize, but Lloyd, but Danny DeVito, man, he didn't. Other than he was short, no resemblance to his future kind of look. Dancing
Well,
around.
he looked kind of similar in Taxi, which was
Yeah.
like started 3 years after this.
Yeah, dancing
So,
around.
yeah. But obviously completely
Let me get-
different persona, which
Yeah.
is a credit to his acting ability. I just saw him recently on a movie, Get Shorty, where he played
Oh, that was good,
film,
yeah.
a filmmaker, like
was
very strange character. He was very funny.
I like
And
He wasn't wearing
recognize his
glasses
voice.
too.
Fred
He
wants
didn't
to
have
talk.
glasses and he wasn't bald.
right.
I wanted to
Right.
comment on,
Yes.
the
Fred.
fishing. I thought the fishing scene was important because to me, the insane people became much more normal when they got out of that institution and they were doing normal things like fishing, catching a fish. They were happy. And it reminded me of a film. I don't know if the writer had any connection, but there was a film called The King of Hearts or The Name of Hearts. And
I'm glad you said. I was going to mention that. Yes,
yeah,
with
it was
Alan
it was a
Bates.
great film. It was an insane asylum in France, and the people were all crazy. And then the Germans came, and all the French citizens left the city, and the insane people took over the city, and they were completely normal, and the German and the French were insane. So it was really
Right.
a great-
It was an
contrast.
anti-war movie showing
Yeah.
that the inmates in the asylum were the ones who wanted peace, and
Right.
everyone outside the asylum, the Germans and French, were fighting each other.
Killing
And
each
who's
other.
really sane?
Right, that's right. I just wonder if that had some motivation for the author to write this thing. I don't know.
Right.
Yeah, I'm trying to think. King of Hearts came out in the early. I think it came out after the book, after Kesey's
Okay.
book. It was 64, 65, something like that.
Yeah.
But but pretty close, similar timing. But I think the book was first. I'm not positive, but I think so.
So the
Yeah,
bottom
because-
line is people who are locked up in institutions may be more sane than their diagnosis on their charts.
Right. Yeah, there was definitely a flip, and I'm glad you said that because I had it in my notes, but I hadn't gotten to it. Yep, good. Yeah. So, but I think the way the fact this movie got made at all after all the false starts, and then no one thought it was going to be a hit, and then Jack Nicholson was not only paid a lot relatively out of the 4.4 million, he was the biggest line item on the budget, but he had 10 points on the profits of the movie.
Alright.
So 10% of the profit of the movie. So he said the movie made him rich.
How much did Michael Douglas make? Michael Douglas owned the movie. No, he owned it.
Yeah.
Well, he produced it with Saul Zaentz. So the two of them were co-producers. So yeah, Michael Douglas obviously made a ton of movie, as did Zaentz. Yes.
It's interesting also, they said that he was sane, but he was dangerous. They knew he was
Someone
sane,
needs to mute.
but they called him dangerous because he was a danger to the whole system that they had there. But they
Right.
knew he was sane.
Yeah.
He was
Kind of
sociopathic.
like dichotomy of what they're doing there. Yeah.
Right, but the reason I would agree with you, Marcia, and I think the reason he was lobotomized wasn't because he was dangerous to the other patients. It was because he was a danger to the system.
Right.
So the
Right.
system used the easy solution for them, just remove any potential, sort of like if you remember Clockwork Orange, right? If a certain patient, Alex in Clockwork Orange, was given the choice to do good or evil, and he's going to choose evil, that's when he gets punished. And I was trying to find the section in my notes where in this film, sex always got punished. And I'm not able to find it, but that was a theme in the movie.
Think about it differently in today's world. Putin. Think about Putin and Fletcher. And you kind of repress the people that challenge you. This man taught these people how to fish. He had compassion. I go back to Billy. I challenged Fred again on the sociopath.
Yes, that's right. You're right, David. I agree.
Good.
So
I'm coming over there. We're gonna fight.
He had a
this.
conscience.
right,
If you're a
Compassion.
sociopath, you don't have a conscience.
right. And he gave the woman to Billy, and that was a big gesture. That was a kind gesture.
And
Right,
the
that's
other
right.
thing you can't ignore, he had the chance to leave. The door
Right.
was open. You see him
Right.
waking up.
He wouldn't
Yes.
let, he wouldn't leave him. He wouldn't leave
He
the
didn't
dying
leave
man.
them. Exactly.
leave
He
'em.
wanted, he felt some sort of compassion, or that he needed to help protect them. Right.
Ed, I'd like to ask you about
Go ahead, Joel.
who in an institution's got the right to lobotomize somebody? I mean,
Right.
was
Right.
it a director, or what? Was there any protection for the patients?
It was
Well,
Putin.
not then.
We can't bring up our Facebook.
Yeah, again, remember the film, the book that had the original plot line was in the early 60s. So that may have been able to be done then, but not by the time the movie came out in the mid 70s.
Hey, Ed,
Remem-
Well, in civilian life, well,
Wait, do you remember the true story about that actor? Oh God, it was one name. It was a single name picture where she gets lobotomized. And
Francis.
Francis,
Oh, Francis.
thank you.
Yes. That was 1963. I think it was the date I noticed someplace on a car or something.
And that's a true story. That was an amazing movie.
Yep.
well,
hey, Ed, do you know
And
where,
also,
Excuse me 1 second. I found
That's
it.
one of the
While I can
Kennedys.
read it, let me read it real quick. Sex gets punished. This was in looper.com. Every time someone has sex or mentions it in the film, the character gets punished. Whether it's on the ship when Mac goes below deck with Candy and the patients panic and almost crash the boat, or the way Ratchet gets manipulative and hostile anytime someone brings up sex during the group. In Billy's case, his punishment was death. Let's see. It says this was an outdated TV and film trope, especially prevalent during those periods when society frowned hardest upon expressions of sexuality and freedom. So,
hey, Ed, do you know where
yes.
where the original name of the movie came from, where the author got the name? Did you read that?
I didn't see it.
Well, it actually came from a rhyme about 3 geese. One flew east, one flew west, one flew over the cuckoo's nest. And
Oh,
and the
that
cuckoo's
makes more
nest-
sense.
and the cuckoo's nest refers to a mental hospital where
Of course.
these people
One
that's
from
where
the
the name
west.
originally came from.
But I didn't know it came from like a nurse.
Thank you. I wanted to know about that. That's what I wanted to know.
Great,
Get-
great. I'm
get
glad you
back-
had that. Thank you very much.
Yeah,
Getting back to
it's just
Jack Nicholson.
children's rhyme. That's all it is.
They were dangerous.
Yeah.
But I
Ann,
just
did you have
wanted to
something?
Yeah, I wanted to make another comment about the Jack Nicholson character. I thought that there were another reason, well, no offense, honey, but I don't think he's a psychopath either, sociopath, is that he had such a beautiful bond with that, the American Indian guy.
Yeah.
that-
Right,
I mean,
right.
he promoted him. I think in the beginning, it didn't start out that way, but he really connected with him, and they
Yeah.
seemed to really have formed like a brotherhood together. The fact that that guy, had a mercy killing was
Right.
quite a beautiful relationship.
So why do you think he killed him at the end?
It was a
Well, I
mitzvah.
think it was a mercy.
Yeah.
Mercy.
He loved him.
He loved him.
Yeah, he loved
And
mercy.
that-
And he didn't
He
want to
loved him and
see
he
him lobotomized.
Yeah.
I think part of it, that was part of it. I think the other part of it was he didn't want the other patients to see him like that.
Oh,
He-
I think
He also
wanted
said
to
he was
leave him-
taking him with
them.
him. That's his out.
Right.
Otherwise, he would have been there forever like that.
Right. And he didn't want the other patients to see that because it would have been a symbol of the successful repression by Nurse Ratchet.
Right.
But this way,
Right.
as a death, he's like inspiring the other patients, which again kind of goes back to my point. He's maybe like a Christ-like figure by inspiring every other by his death and sacrifice. So,
And escaping with the water fountain also.
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Take it to
Go
the
ahead,
water
Ben.
fountain.
Escaping with the water bath or whatever that.
being able to lift that up, which he couldn't do, but
Right.
Hampson could, right?
Because if you remember when Nicholson said it, he said, "I tried at least."
Exactly, right. But he inspired the Indian to do it.
Yeah.
Mhm.
I'm glad he went to Canada. He was safe there.
Yeah, but they have no vaccine there.
All right, I don't want to run over too much. We're a couple minutes over. Anyone have any other closing thoughts?
Yeah, and what's with the mother, the relationship? Ratchet knew how to really get to everybody, be it the mother or the cigarettes or whatever they wanted. She knew how to really get to them and
But,
really
you know,
hurt them.
Billy,
But what's
Billy
with the
had,
mother thing? She said,
Billy
"I
had
know
an
you're
incestual
well."
relationship. Billy had an incestual relationship with the mother, and he hated what she was doing to him, controlling him. So she
Right.
knew that ratchet, and she ratcheted it up.
And she used it, right? She ratcheted
Right,
it
she
up.
used it, yeah.
Right.
She really did. She knew what buttons to push.
Right. So there was another comment in one of the information pieces I read, one of the articles, that the Ken Kesey, which this is what it goes back to, the source, felt that basically mother was bad. He was demonizing the whole womanhood institution,
Right.
the institution of motherhood, essentially, by showing everything possible negative about it. The film didn't want to do that quite as much, but they just focused on Ratchet. But Candy, was at least a more positive character.
Right.
She was a happy hooker.
Oh, happy hooker.
Right. Yep.
Yes.
All right. Well, did everyone people who came in late, please put your email address in the chat so I know you watched, and then I can send you the ballot for the next film.
Good job, Ed.
Everyone get it? Thank you.
Very
Thank
good.
you so
Thank
much.
you.
That was great.
Thank
Wait,
you.
one
It
last
was
thing.
great, Ed.
Was the
All right,
black
thanks.
guy at the end the guy from The Shining?
Yes, Scatman Crothers. He made, I think, 4 movies with Jack.
Yeah,
Nicholson.
he's
I thought
good.
that was
He's
it.
good.
Yeah.
I don't know if I missed it before, but
Yep.
thanks, Ed.
Yep.
Hey, Rebecca, is
Yes.
Nurse Ratched in his room?
She was right
Well-
outside the door.
Ah!
I mean, good luck if she's in your room, I'll tell you.
Smart move.
Oh,
Good luck.
All
God.
right. Thank you,
God.
everybody.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you.
Great job.
Thank
Thanks a
you.
lot. What should we watch tonight? What should we watch tonight?
Oh, did
What's
you
your
see that
recommendation
movie
for tonight?
Nomads?
Huh? Ellie, what's the
Nomad?
Oh my
Nomad?
God.
What is that?
That's very unusual with Frances McDormand.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, I
love
her.
Nomad.
What's
Where's it on? Where's it
I'm
on?
gonna see that. I love her.
It's on Hulu and it's real and all the people are real except for Strathairn, her and the Strathairn's son, Trey.
Okay.
And I think one other
Anywhere
person.
else?
They're all real. They didn't know they were being filmed and obviously then they found out. But it's really like another world out there. If you want to get into another world. And
No,
it's
thank
just
you.
amazing.
I'll give you one.
This
It's on
one's tough
Netflix.
enough.
No, I don't mean that, another world. I mean, the way people live, there's other people in society, the way they live, and
Right, right.
it's really interesting, really interesting.
A fun one is it's fun, silly, and very intelligent and thought-provoking philosophically as well. Is a TV series on Netflix. It used to be on NBC called The Good Place.
Wow.
If you haven't seen it, heartily
The
recommend it.
dead
It has
people.
Ted Danson and Kristen Bell, and how they deal with the afterlife and trying to get into heaven.
wow.
It's funny, but it's very philosophical as
I
well.
want to see Nomad.
Hey, Ed,
Yes.
I got a quick question. How did they get around the HIPAA violation? There was no HIPAA then.
There was
right?
none.
There was none. I mean,
There
can you
was none.
imagine that?
Right.
Film mental patients? That's unbelievable.
Right.
It's a movie.
Couldn't do it today.
But there were real patients
God.
in it, and they were in the background.
What's the next movie, Ed? What's the next movie?
You gotta vote.
Well, you got to
You have
vote
to
on it.
vote.
Where's the
vote.
voting? Where's the voting opportunity?
You'll get 2 votes if you put your email in the chat.
I put mine in.
Good.
It should
This
be
is,
last
Send
as
it
well.
around.
It's
It'll
a
send it
democratic
around.
republic.
In another couple of weeks,
We
when I
can
see
go
what's
to
going, another week or so, when I see what's going on for March movies, I'll put it out there and everyone can vote, and we'll do this again towards the end of March.
Okay.
Hey,
Great.
stay sane,
Great.
everybody.
Bye-bye. I
All
need
right,
something
thanks.
good on Netflix. Something good on Netflix.
I'm telling you, The
Hey,
Good
there's
Place.
so much
Check it out.
stuff.
So much fun.
Not scary on Netflix.
No, The Good Place is not scary.
What
It's
everybody
funny.
else is doing.
And you get through the
The
first
Good
season, the
Place.
second season's a mind blower.
Right.
All right.
We recommend Offspring, Australian program.
Yeah, I watched a couple. My wife loves it. She's hooked on the whole thing. I was in a few episodes and I was like, okay, I got it.
We're in
Which
the
one
fifth
is it?
year. We're in the 5th year.
Oh, wow. Yeah, so I think my wife's
That's
not worth it.
Wow.
Offspring. Okay. Bye-bye.
Offspring?
All right, stay healthy.
Okay.
Offspring?
Yep.
Okay.
Thanks,
Bye,
everybody.
Mother
Appreciate it.
Zoom.
I'm trying to do it. It's
Bye.
in the chat.
Good night, Ed.
Good
Good
night.
night.
Hi, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Hey,
I have to see how to get out of here, right?
Leave
Yeah.
meeting.
get our picture when we.
Leave
Keep
meeting.
doing it.
Okay, leave meeting.
This way.
Yeah, I know.